It's the feet in the morning, isn't it? That first step out of bed that feels like walking on marbles. Or maybe for you, it's the shoulder that's suddenly frozen, the one you can't even reach behind your back to fasten a bra with anymore. You go to a doctor, maybe even a specialist, and they do the x-ray and you hear the words, a little arthritis, some wear and tear, or the most dismissive one of all, well, you're just getting older. And you leave that office feeling smaller, crazier. You start to believe it's your fault. I'm here to tell you something that should have been said to you a long time ago. You are not crazy. You are not alone. What you are feeling is profoundly real, but the reason you were given for it is almost certainly wrong. The silence ends in this room. Look, this isn't about blaming a single doctor. This is about a system that has failed women for decades. Let me give you just one number to hold on to. The master hormone that regulates the connective tissue in every single joint in your body, your estradiol, it's dropped by over 95% from what it was just a few years ago. A 95% drop in a critical signaling molecule. And yet, nearly 80% of OB/GYN residents report receiving no formal training in menopause. It's a gap in education so profound it has become a generational silence. And we're going to break it. Because the pain you're feeling isn't just about aging. It's a specific physiological event. And once I explain the mechanism, you will never see that ache in your hip the same way again. This silence, it isn't new. It has a history. For a brief time, we were actually on the right track. But then, in 2002, a single study came out, the Women's Health Initiative. The headlines were sensational, and they were terrifying. And in the panic that followed, the medical community didn't just pump the brakes on hormone therapy, they threw the car in reverse and tossed the keys out the window. An entire generation of doctors, the ones you are likely seeing today, was trained in the shadow of that fear. So for the last 20 years, the most powerful systemic tool for addressing the root cause of what was happening to you was relegated to a last resort. Your mother's generation was abandoned to untreated symptoms. They were told their suffering was a small price to pay to avoid a risk that was, as we now know, wildly misinterpreted. So you end up in the office of a specialist, an orthopedist, or a rheumatologist. And I want to be very clear, these are dedicated, highly trained experts. They are looking for what they were trained to find: joint destruction, cartilage loss, specific inflammatory markers of autoimmune disease. They order an X-ray, an MRI. And when those tests come back and show no major structural damage, they are left with only one conclusion from their playbook: it must be wear and tear. The idea that a reproductive hormone is the primary driver of collagen synthesis for your entire musculoskeletal system, honestly, that's not in their textbook. It's not what they see day to day. They see a woman in her 50s with pain, and they connect the dots the only way they were taught. It's a curriculum failure, not a personal one. And you're the one who pays the price for that gap in their education. And so the silence gets passed down, almost like an heirloom. Think about your own mother. Did she have bad knees? Did she complain of rheumatism in the morning? She almost certainly lived through this exact experience, but she did it in the dark, without a name for it. She couldn't warn you about something she herself was never taught. So when the pain started for you, you did what you saw her do. You used a heating pad. You took Advil. You rested. But this time, it's not getting better, is it? In fact, that little ache is becoming a constant companion. And this is the critical part one needs you to hear. There is a window. A critical period after menopause begins where we have the best opportunity to protect your tissues for the long term. Every year you spend thinking this is just your age, that window closes a little more. What you're feeling isn't a personality flaw. It's physiology, and I'm going to explain exactly what is happening in your body. Let's be honest about who failed you, because it wasn't a single person. It was a curriculum. The average primary care doctor gets less than a single hour of menopause education in their entire training. It's a blind spot the size of a decade of a woman's life. And into that silence, a different player stepped in, the wellness industry. It saw your pain, it saw your confusion, and it sold you a story. A story of detoxes and special supplements and $100 billion promise that if you just tried a little harder, you could fix yourself. They were more than happy to talk to you about your symptoms as long as the answer was something you could add to your cart. The medical system was silent and the market was loud, and you were left in the middle, holding a bottle of turmeric capsules, wondering why your joints still ached. And while that was happening on the outside, your body was sending a clear signal on the inside that nobody was trained to hear. With the drop in estrogen, your body's ability to create collagen, the literal protein scaffold that holds your joints, your skin, your ligaments together, declined by up to 30% in just the first 5 years. Think about that. A third of the material that keeps your joints cushioned and your tendons supple, gone. This is why a woman in her early 50s is 4 times more likely to suddenly develop a frozen shoulder. It isn't random. It's a structural failure at a cellular level. It's your body losing its shock absorbers. And that ache you feel isn't just pain. It's the sound of a system in distress. But what does that loss of collagen actually do to the tissue itself? How does it turn a flexible joint into a painful one? That is the critical piece of the puzzle we have to look at next. So you have to understand, estrogen isn't just a reproductive hormone. We have estrogen receptors in over 400 different tissues in your body. 400. They're in your brain, your blood vessels, your bones, and critically, they are dense in the connective tissues of every single joint you have. Estrogen is the signal that tells those tissues to stay hydrated, to build collagen, to manage inflammation. When that signal goes quiet, another chemical signal gets louder, inflammatory molecules called cytokines. They rise. And suddenly, your body is in a state of low-grade systemic inflammation. It isn't a single injury. It's a body-wide condition. That's why the pain can feel like it moves. One day it's your hip, the next it's your wrist. It's not in your head. It's the inflammation looking for a place to land. But why does this happen to so many women, and why does nobody seem to connect the dots? In 30 years of practice, I have seen this exact pattern thousands of times. A woman, active, healthy, suddenly sidelined by pain that has no clear cause. And I'll tell you honestly, I went through this myself. I was 52, and I remember the exact morning standing at my own kitchen sink, and I couldn't grip the sponge hard enough to wash a pan. The ache in my thumb joint was exquisite. And my first thought, even as a doctor, was arthritis. It took me a week to connect it to the night sweats I'd been having. I was the one who was supposed to know, and even I fell for the old story. We are all swimming in a sea of misinformation. Your pain isn't a random collection of sore spots. It's a predictable pattern of systemic loss. You are not failing. You were never told the truth about what was happening to you. And here's the layer that almost no one ever discusses. This isn't just about tissue quality. The loss of estrogen literally rewires how your brain perceives pain. It lowers the threshold. Sensations that might have been minor annoyances a few years ago are now registered as significant pain. Estrogen helps modulate your brain's own internal pain-killing system, the endorphins. When estrogen declines, so does that natural buffer. So not only is there more inflammation at the joint, but your brain's alarm system is now set to a hair trigger. That's why the pain can feel so disproportionate, so emotionally draining. It's real, it's amplified, and it's coming from a change in your brain chemistry. So now that you see the pieces, the collagen loss, the inflammation, the change in your brain's wiring, let's put them together. Let me explain what is actually happening in your body, step by step, with the numbers that prove it. All right, let's start with the bone. Because while you're feeling the ache in your joints, something profound is happening underneath. In the first 5 to 7 years after your last period, you can lose up to 20% of your bone density. 20%. This isn't just a future risk of a fracture. It's a present-day reality. That deep, nagging ache you feel in your hips or your spine, it's not just your imagination. Bone is living tissue, and when it's losing its mineral scaffolding that quickly, it is in a state of distress. It is sending a pain signal. Your body is trying to tell you that the internal framework is weakening, but you were taught to interpret that signal as just the inevitable creaks and groans of getting older. It's not. It's the sound of a silent demolition. Now, let's add another layer. As your estrogen declines, your sleep architecture falls apart. You lose the deep, restorative stages of sleep where your body does its repairs. The result? Your primary stress hormone, cortisol, which should be low at night, starts to spike. And chronically high cortisol does something very specific to a woman's body in midlife. It tells your body to store visceral fat, that dense inflammatory fat right around your middle, at a rate up to 11% higher than before. This isn't the same fat you had in your 30s. This is metabolically active, inflammatory fat, churning out those same cytokine molecules we talked about, creating a constant, low-grade fire of inflammation that settles right into those vulnerable, collagen-depleted joints. You're not just fighting a structural problem anymore. You're fighting an inflammatory storm, fueled by a hormonal shift you were never warned about. I had a patient last month, I'll call her Susan, who came into my office, and her words have stuck with me. She looked at me, her hands trembling just a little, and said, "I feel like I'm slowly turning to glass. Like my whole body is becoming brittle, and one wrong move will just shatter me." She wasn't talking about her bones. Not really. She was talking about her tendons, her muscles, that feeling of fragility. I explained to her that she was sensing something real, the loss of collagen, the weakening of the connective tissue matrix. I told her that her feeling of being brittle wasn't drama. It was an intuitive, accurate assessment of her own changing physiology. And I saw the relief wash over her face as tears welled up in her eyes. She just whispered, "So it's not all in my head. I'm not being a baby about it." In that moment, she wasn't a patient. She was every woman who has ever been made to feel like her pain was an exaggeration. And the hits keep coming, because this isn't just structural, and it isn't just inflammatory. It's metabolic. Within the first year after your final period, your insulin sensitivity can decrease by as much as 15%. This is a staggering change. It means the balanced, healthy diet you've eaten your whole life suddenly starts to fail you. A bowl of oatmeal, a piece of fruit, foods that were once perfectly fine can now cause a blood sugar spike that your body struggles to manage. And that excess sugar in your bloodstream? It contributes directly to systemic inflammation through a process called glycation, making your joints even more painful. You're doing everything right, eating healthy, but your body's chemistry has been fundamentally rewired. You're stuck in a vicious cycle where the very food you eat to stay healthy might be contributing to your pain. So let me explain what is actually happening in your body, because it's a cascade. Your estrogen drops, which dissolves your sleep quality. The poor sleep raises your cortisol, which then wraps your organs in inflammatory fat. At the same time, your insulin resistance is climbing, making your diet a potential source of more inflammation. And all of this is happening to a musculoskeletal system that has lost the primary hormone that keeps it strong and flexible. You are pushing a boulder uphill in a snowstorm with shoes that don't fit. That is why just stretch more or take some ibuprofen feels like such an infuriatingly inadequate answer. That is not aging. That is a multi-system hormonal collapse that nobody ever explained to you. It was never a fair fight. This is the moment the ground gives way beneath your feet. The woman who has done everything right, who stretched before the run, who rested, who iced the ache, suddenly finds that nothing works anymore. The plantar fasciitis from nowhere, the hip that clicks with every yoga pose, the shoulder that just froze. Strategies that have been your trusted toolkit for 30 years stop working. And in that moment, you blame yourself. I must not be trying hard enough. I'm here to tell you the strategy didn't fail. The tissue did. You're trying to run the same software on entirely new hardware, and nobody gave you the manual for the upgrade. That's the turning point. The quiet click when you realize the game was rigged. You've been treating the smoke while the fire was burning in a completely different room. That is not aging. That is a hormone shift nobody explained to you. Your body isn't betraying you. It has been sending clear signals that an entire system of medicine was never trained to hear. And in that clarity, a quiet anger builds at the silence, the dismissal, the years you may have lost. You are not crazy. You are not alone. You are a woman finally waking up to the truth of what's happening inside her own skin. Here's what it looks like if you stay on this path. In the next 1 to 3 years, the pain doesn't just stay, it digs in. It leads to a cycle of inactivity. You stop walking because your hip hurts, you lose muscle, your joints become more unstable. You spend money on temporary fixes that never reach the root. Your sleep is shredded by night sweats, and that exhaustion compounds everything. With every month, the voice in your head gets louder. See? Something is wrong with you. In 3 to 10 years, the silent damage accelerates. Bone density loss isn't theoretical anymore. It's quietly setting you up for a future fracture. The natural cardiovascular protection from estrogen is gone, and your risk climbs to match a man's. Genitourinary syndrome becomes chronic and progressively worse, impacting intimacy and confidence. The cognitive symptoms start to feel less like a bad day and more like a permanent part of your personality, alarming you and your family. Then there's the long game. 10, 20, 30 years out, 1 in 2 women over 50 will suffer a fracture related to osteoporosis. The dementia risk rises because estrogen is profoundly neuroprotective. and cardiovascular disease becomes the leading killer of women over 60. It's not just about living with pain. It's about a life cut short, or last decade spent managing frailty instead of enjoying freedom. The slow, dawning horror of realizing you spent 30 years suffering from symptoms that were treatable inside a silence that was always optional. But the most immediate consequence is happening inside your head right now. Anxiety is reported by up to 70% of women in this transition. Depression rates nearly double in perimenopause. You're living with psychological distress that is a direct physiological consequence of your hormonal shifts, but you've been taught to see it as a personal failing. You feel ashamed, isolated, because every other woman seems to be coping fine. They aren't. They're just better at hiding it. Tell me in the comments which consequence you're most afraid of. The bone loss? The heart disease? The mental toll right now? I read every one because your stories are the proof that this is real. This is not personal failure. This is inherited silence with a measurable physical cost. So what do you do with this? You stop. Stop chasing each ache as if it were a separate fire. Stop blaming your running shoes or the way you slept. The single most powerful shift is to stop seeing this as a dozen different problems and start recognizing it as one systemic signal. Your body is telling you its master regulator is offline. The path forward is not a new supplement, not a magic protocol. It is a new conversation. The exit is finding a practitioner fluent in the language of hormonal health and asking the question that gets to the root. This is hard. The realization often comes with quiet anger for years lost in confusion. But you were not failing. You were never told the truth. That silence was designed to make you feel isolated and at fault. Now you understand the mechanism. You see the pattern, and you can't unsee it. You are no longer a woman whose body is mysteriously breaking down. You are a woman who has just been given the dictionary for a language your body has been speaking in pain for years. Your body isn't falling apart. It's sending a signal that was ignored. The pain was never the problem. It was the messenger. This isn't 100 different fires. It's a single alarm ringing for years inside a soundproof room. The silence ends here, with you refusing to accept the old, tired stories any longer. Share your story below. What was the one thing you needed to hear today? I read every one because your voice is the sound of this silence finally breaking for good. So I'm going to leave you with a question, and I want you to sit with it for a while. How many days, how many moments have you already lost to a pain you thought was your fault when it was a symptom you were never warned about? Now that you understand the connection, the next step is to make sure you are heard. Because knowing the truth is one thing, getting the right help is another. That's why in the next conversation, we are going to talk about the exact sentences that force a doctor to take your experience seriously. You will need them. Take care of yourself. I will see you in the next one.